Greetings, y'all. Glad you were able to join us again today. Last time we read through Genesis 6:9 to 7:5 about how God called Noah the only righteous man left on the earth, away from whatever else he might have, wanted to spend his life doing, like anything at all to build a big, giant boat, or as God called it, a box, to protect himself and his family and representatives of every kind of animal. Because you know that what Noah was really looking forward to in his life was spending time with the animals, lots of animals, and taking care of all of them. This was really what he wanted to do, right? Okay, God had determined that he was going to use the earth to destroy man, for man had ruined the earth. How had man ruined the earth? Was it because, by destroying the ozone layer or filling the atmosphere with carbon dioxide and the oceans with plastic? No, man had ruined the earth by filling it with violence. Now, of course, you can sense the irony here. Man is killing each other, and so God is going to kill everyone to put a stop to man killing. God has obviously seen that unless he gives the earth a hard reset, the cycle of violence is not going to come to an end. It's just going to keep going. And when you look around throughout history, think of how much violence there has been on the earth. Wars and genocides and holocausts and mass starvations. We've dropped atomic bombs on each other. Then consider this. If God is tolerating this much violence now, how much worse had it to have been to say that a mass execution of the population was better? Then again, we might also ask ourselves, how much more of this today do you think he can tolerate before he comes back for a final judgment? All right, going on to chapter 7, starting at verse 6. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals, and of animals that are not clean, and of birds, and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God had commanded Noah. Now, just to keep score on Noah's life, Moses mentions that he is now 600 years old. Now, if you're looking at this as mytho-history, then you would consider Noah's age to be honorific or an indicator of his increased status or wisdom, meaning that he is really somewhere between 40 and 60 years old, but he's really awesome. That is, of course, assuming he was ever real, at all. If you consider Genesis 1 to 11 to be legitimate history, you'll just note that Noah is now somewhat middle-aged when compared to his forefathers. Either way, he's in pretty good physical shape, and probably much better shape than I am, undoubtedly. After loading animals onto the ark furiously for the last 7 days, missing all of their favorite shows at the local theater, Noah and Mrs. Noah and their sons and Mrs. Sons? Mrs. Sons? Yeah. The sons and Mrs. Sons. The soon-to-be orphaned daughters. They're all now safely aboard the ark. And now we need to take a quick break to discuss whether Noah had daughters. Yeah. This is the thing you never knew you needed to talk about before. Now, if you spend a few hours reading the Bible, which painfully few people even bother to do, then you will have noticed that daughters, and frankly women in general, are frequently not included in the stories, though far more often than many of the feminists think they are. They are, as we could say, overlooked. Now, to be fair, most men are also overlooked in the Bible. Only few are ever actually mentioned, but for women, the overlooking is quite pervasive. Mrs. Noah, for example, what's her name? Mrs.? We don't even know her name, nor do we know, Mrs. Sons' names. The daughters-in-law, don't know their names. Why didn't Moses include this detail? Now, let's not pretend that this is actually because Moses is sexist. If you look at the rest of the Pentateuch, you'll notice that Moses tells you the name of his mother. Jochebed or Jochebed? Jochebed? Yokevev? If you know how to pronounce it, he does tell you the name. His wife is Zipporah, his sister Miriam, the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and many others. But unless they're directly pertinent to the story, the names of the women before Moses comes on the scene are quite lacking. I mean, we get Eve. That's good. What this indicates is that while Moses puts names in the texts, the source of his material, whether it was oral or written, did not include most of the women's names. And this is largely because genealogies throughout all history rarely mention women. They're typically carried father to son because, quite honestly, territory and property have almost always been carried down father to son. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just saying that just is the way it is. So you can get the names of all kinds of guys you really honestly don't care about, whether you knew their names or not. And their wives, who also you didn't care about, just as much, they're completely forgotten. So what about Noah's daughters? Did he have any? Did God just decide that, well, they married the wrong dude, so they're going to die? That just is the way it is. But, those girls who marry Noah's sons, they're kind of lucky. I can't answer this question directly. I really wish I could, but I cannot answer it directly. But I can answer it indirectly. If you skip over to Genesis 19, you'll see, whoosh, 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 the pages go. You'll see that when God decided to destroy Sodom, that he intentionally protected Lot's daughters, even though they were engaged to be married to men who were horrible human beings and who were about to die. He protected them anyway. This indicates that the intent of God is to protect the daughters of the righteous man, even when the righteous man is only, sort of righteous. And even when the daughters are not that good at all. Given this, if you read to the end of Lot's story, you'll know what I'm talking about. Given this, it's reasonable to conclude, we'll do that later, that Noah did not have any daughters. Otherwise, they would have been aboard the ark as well, and maybe even their husbands, but probably not. But they would have been aboard the ark as well. Or if he did have daughters, they summarily rejected the opportunity to be saved along with him, just like everyone else. 10 through 16. And after 7 days the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day Noah and his sons Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with him entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, and every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. Thwumph. All right, repetition. Just have to clarify, in case you haven't read it at least 4 times, the animals were all on the ark with Noah and his family. Moses apparently really does want us to miss the point that the animals, each of their kind, in individual categories, each of their kind, 2 and 2, each of its kind, the clean animals, the unclean animals, they're all there. Okay, Moses, I got it, man. I got it. Good gravy, how many times do you have to tell me that? I just don't want you to miss it. Did you catch it? Do I have to tell you again? No. The animals were all on the ark with Noah. Got it. Now for the interesting bits that can get missed in the middle. First, the flood began on the 17th day of the 2nd month. Who cares? Now, I don't know if this is the same calendar that God had established with Moses to use in Exodus chapter 12. However, it would be reasonable. And the reason why it would be reasonable is because God gave that calendar to Moses, and that same God established the calendar in Genesis 1. Remember in Genesis 1:14 that God created the sun and the moon for signs and for seasons, for days and years. Okay? In other words, it's reasonable to think that the day that Moses is giving us the calendar for Noah's flood is based on the same calendar the Hebrews were now using. And this means that the flood began the 17th day after the new moon, after the spring equinox. That date is in absolutely no way special in any way, shape, or form in the rest of the Pentateuch. So, here comes the question. If this story is mythohistory, why did Moses choose this particular date for the flood to begin? Because remember, if it's mythohistory, Moses picks the date. Why did he pick that day? Why not choose a significant date, like the 14th day of the first month, Passover? To coincide with God's judgment, in the ancient world with God's judgment of the Egyptian world. That would make sense. It's not like he needed to worry about whether or not the people would believe him. They totally believe him, or they would have known it was mythohistory and it's just a story, and so no big deal. I have no resolution on this particular question. Like I've said, I'm trying to be fair on all sides, but I don't know what to do with that. If you know, that's what the comments section is for. I think this detail is glaring evidence that Moses was convinced that the story was authentic and true. Second, skip down to verse 16 for a bit. And the Lord shut him in. Noah did not shut Noah into the ark. Now, maybe he closed the door physically, but Moses wants you to know that it is God who sealed off Noah and his family from the destruction coming upon the earth. It is God who sealed him in. This is akin to what the Hebrews experienced during the plagues, when God separated his people from his judgment that was befalling others. During the death of the firstborn, God gave the people clear instructions to remain in their houses. They put the blood on the doorpost and stay inside, for judgment was falling on everyone outside of those homes. This pattern continues later on, such as Jerusalem under Hezekiah. When God brought judgment upon Judah, he set aside a single city, Jerusalem, that was to be spared. And everyone who fled there, they would be spared, and nobody on the outside would be spared. And it was a horrible bloodbath everywhere. This pattern is not typical, though, so you can't just sit there and say, well, this is what God uses throughout the Bible. It's not. It can be used as it can't be used as a definitive pattern to see how God will judge. For example, God judges Sodom by removing Lot, not by saving Lot in the city, but by pulling Lot out, and destroys the city and the cities around it. Although, at Lot's request, he spares Zoar because that's where Lot is. God judges the Canaanites en masse. He doesn't protect the location of the Hebrews. Instead, he's using the Hebrews to judge the Canaanites. During the exile to Babylon, he doesn't protect his believers at all. Rather, they're exiled with absolutely everyone else. They're just in the midst of the crowds. This is how Daniel ends up in Babylon. When Jerusalem is destroyed by the Romans, the way God protected his believers was to send them out of the city, not into the city because he's protecting the city, but it's the city he's destroying, and so they leave. Go somewhere else, as the city is judged. Throughout the history of the church thereafter, sometimes there's a place to flee to. Sometimes there's a place to flee from. In the end, though, what we've been told is that we'll be gathered away in the end, during the final judgment. We will be gathered away to be with Christ. And for those who are with Christ, there is no longer any judgment, because no judgment will befall those with him. Now back to verse 11. On that day, verse 11. Yeah. On that day, all the fountains of the deep, of the great deep, that is the great abyss, right? This is the same great abyss that, remember, was the how the Egyptians in their mythology looked at it, where all the monsters were at, right? This is where Apep was in charge. This is the great deep that the whole world was at the beginning. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. All right, clarifying something important. The testimonies of the Bible are by nature observational. Now, this gets missed all the time by all kinds of people. The testimonies of the Bible are observational. That is, when somebody tells you a story, they're telling you what they have observed or a part of what they have observed. Okay? This is from their observation. Although sometimes you'll get hearsay. Hey, somebody told them this, and they'll relate that to you. Okay? Like, for example, the entire book of Luke. He tells you from the beginning that I got this from other people. Okay? But this is observational stuff. Unless a person is given divine knowledge, they have no reason to know what they cannot see or what others have not relayed to them that they could see. This matters in this particular passage. The fountains of the great deep burst forth. Now, I've seen videos, of the bottom of the ocean fracturing open, spilling out water, while the narrator is talking about the fountains of the great deep bursting forth. Maybe this happened, maybe not. There's nothing in this passage that states this. Why? Because that's happened at the bottom of the ocean now, isn't it? Who in Noah's family was watching that? Did they observe that? Well, it's in the Bible. You're supposed to believe. I understand it's in the Bible. You're supposed to believe. What you're supposed to understand is that it's an observational statement. In other words, Noah or Shem or Ham or Japheth, or it misses any of them. We really need those ladies' names. Somebody had to see it happen. So whatever they're watching isn't taking place at the bottom of the ocean. Maybe things happen there too, but whatever they are seeing is taking place where they can see it. Okay. So whatever the fountains of the great deep bursting forth means, it has to be something they could observe from their location inside the ark looking out through that window. Massive geysers? Plausible. Volcanoes? Plausible. Now, I've been told it can't be volcanoes because volcanoes are not fountains, you see. It's actually liquid rock. It's magma flying up in the air. This is not what this is saying. Okay, guys, this is a silly restriction. The Hebrew language did not even have words for volcano and lava until the 19th century, which means if you were using Hebrew, how would you describe a volcano? Other than saying it's the big fountains from the abyss. I'm just saying. Okay. Could have seen both. Don't know. The big takeaway here is that you need to keep the observation of the person in mind when you're making declarations about what a text says. What is a person actually seeing, and why does the text say what it says from that person's observation? So consider this. Even Genesis 1 is written from the perspective of a person standing on the ground. That's Genesis 1. And there weren't any humans around then. So, presuming Genesis 1 is actual history, big presumption, even God's vision or his explanation of creation is from the human point of view. Not from the 20th, 21st century human's point of view, but from the point of view of the humans there. There were the heavens, and there was the earth, and the stars and the birds both look like they're in the heavens. Okay? There's no reason to think that he would give Moses or anyone else extra details about like what's going on at the bottom of the ocean or on the other side of the planet during the flood. They couldn't see all those things. We will be back to the same topic shortly. Now, how long did the rain fall? The text says 40 days and 40 nights. Now, I grew up in Oregon, where the rain has never stopped falling. In fact, it's been falling here since the beginning of time. If you've ever seen a picture of Oregon without rain, it's actually Photoshop because it never stops raining here, okay? While rain can create floods, it isn't super common. I mean, it does, but it's not super common. And the reason for that is that the drainage in Oregon happens to be pretty amazing. Why? Because it never stops raining here. Most of the rain is, it's more like a depressing drizzle. It's just enough to tell you that it's going to make you cold today. and sad. Much sad. Now, I've also lived in Oklahoma and I've lived in Houston. You know, it rains far less often, but when it rains, I mean, the entire sky just opens up and dumps the entire Gulf right on your heads. And within a day, the city can be flooded, you know, from one end to the other. Fortunately, with excellent drainage works, the damage is somewhat limited. That's not to say people don't lose their houses. A lot of people lose their houses. And you know, it doesn't work for the people whose houses are destroyed. It's a continual chore to try to improve the drainage system and to make it better and better. And of course, as more people move in, there are more things to clear out. Either way, 40 days and nights of rain by itself is not going to be completely sufficient, you know, to produce the type of water that Moses is getting at here. Water coming up from underneath and geological machinations that Noah had no way of observing is what is needed to do the trick. Now, I'm not going to get into what all those machinations are, but I will say that a tremendous amount of work has actually been done to discover how the flood of Noah could have occurred. And the evidence is pretty impressive of how to make this happen. Now, if you take the mytho-historical view of the text, then the first obvious feature is the term 40 days and 40 nights, which would be a symbolic number of totality, meaning that the flood not only completely destroyed wickedness on the entire earth in the text, but in the numbers as well, okay, because of this totality. What I do not see, though, is a comparative to the plagues of Egypt, which it should reflect. There were only 10 plagues, but there were 40 days of rain. So, what's the comparative that the Hebrews would have known? What would draw out this number 40 instead of, say, a number 10, which would normally be expected? And by the way, it matters because, remember, in the other mythological, well, you wouldn't remember because I haven't said this yet, in the other mythological stories of the time it was raining for the flood was not 40 days, it was 7. So for Moses, this is like a deviation from what they're doing, so he's got to have a reason for the number 40. The answer to that question is found in Genesis 52-3, which says, "And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel," that's his father, 40 days were required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. Now, what does embalming have to do with the flood? Well, everything. I mean, embalming was the process followed by the Egyptians to prepare a body to be received for the afterlife. It was the time of transformation to prepare the subject to go from one world into the next. It wasn't the mourning of the subject's death that took 70 days, but it was the time taken to do the work to make that transformation possible. And we see this pop up again later, namely with the Hebrews traveling in the wilderness for 40 years, the time necessary for God to purge them from their previous land and to make them ready for the next. Moses was on Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights, existing both in this world and in that. In the New Testament, we see Jesus going to the wilderness for 40 days to prepare himself for the transition from his non-ministering years to his ministering years. Then after his resurrection, Jesus spent 40 days more on the earth, like the transformation time I needed, not for him, but for his disciples to become the earth-shaping apostles that they were destined to be. The term 40 is used throughout the Bible for a wide variety of events or activities to represent a completeness. In the case of the flood, the 40 days and nights of rain makes the completeness of that transition of the earth clear to the Hebrews. Okay, but why 40? Other than a loose association to the drying time for embalming, the number 40 is insignificant to the Egyptians. It's just not their number. So where do you get it from? Rather, not going heretic here before I say anything, okay? Rather, it held significance to the people of ancient Sumer and to Babylon, and then much later to Persia. It was the number of Enki, one of the gods of Mesopotamia, and one of the 4 earliest gods attested in writing. In other words, Enki might be, big might be, a twisting of the understanding of the Lord. Not that Enki is the Lord, but Kind of like the down through the ages kind of memory of what the Lord was like coming down from Noah. I have several reasons for this that I'm not going to bore you with. And frankly, they don't impact what Moses is telling us in Genesis, other than a possible route for the transmission of the number 40 from the days of Noah down to the days of Moses. Maybe. Big maybe. Don't glue yourself to this. But I do think it's interesting. And for that reason, I'm going to tell you about it. All right, moving on. 17 to 24. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth. That means the water won. And the ark floated on the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth, it did more winning, that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed upon the mountains and covered them. The mountains lost, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Here we see that the waters covered the entire earth and the mountains by 15 cubits, or about 26 feet. So, many years ago, one of my sons told me that he was at youth group, not at our current church, a different one. And the youth group leader said, the Bible doesn't say that the entire earth was covered in the flood. And my son was aghast. I told him, whoa, technically he is right. The Bible doesn't say that. But it was. And my son, good son form, says, have you lost your mind? Now, remember what we discussed earlier, just a little while ago. What you read in the Bible is based upon the observations of the people who are testifying to it. Okay. Noah is looking out from the window of the ark, what he can see over the land, and what he can see, like over the water. What can he see? And what he can see is that the water is overtaking the mountains, all of them. And I suppose, he may have known how deep it was because maybe it was covering the tops of the trees of those mountains. He had some idea how tall they were. Maybe they went over the top of the mountain, had a drag line. He's giving us 15 cubits, 26 feet of coverage. I could just see one of them diving out, measure with his arm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. This is everything that he can see. And he's not a stupid guy. If it's covering the mountains, that water's got to go a long ways. Okay? So how do we know that it covered the entirety of the earth? Well, first of all, because water does not tend to pile up in one location, for 150 days. It's not like it would bury one continent in like a mile of water and then just, stay on that continent, for half a year. That's not how that works. But second, I'm convinced that the geology of the earth shows worldwide inundation. Now, you can disagree with that second point there, and that's fine. But about that first point, the story is clear. Moses' intent is obvious. Every creature that breathed the air, except those in the ark, died. All of them. Then, for good measure, after it stopped raining, the water stayed for 5 more months. Okay? So, did the water cover the entire earth? The water certainly, according to the story, covered the entire earth as the people understood it, observationally. Now then, you have to use the logic to get from there to the rest of it. And of course, then it's going to be an argument of geology. And you can then you can argue geology forever after that. And that's fine. Okay, into chapter 8 for just 5 verses here. Noah and all the beasts. Oh, oops. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. And the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. Here we see that the draining of the earth is an incredibly slow process. There are 2 different ways to view this. And again, it depends on whether or not you're going to view this as actual history or as mytho-history. If actual history, you know that water draining off the land has, to go somewhere. If the water on the continents is, say, a mile deep, then the extra water in the oceans has to be just as, the water on top of those oceans has to be just as deep. So where'd all the water go? Again, there are some great scientific answers, but these would be at play. And we know that Moses wouldn't have understood any of it, which is okay. So he's silent on the topic. He just doesn't discuss it. And why would he? The wind blowing over the earth is a fascinating addition, and it actually indicates a piece of science that Moses would have had no way of personally knowing about. That without the constraint of continents as obstacles, that the wind would pick up in speed and become quite fierce. If he may have been able to get some of this from the Egyptians coming back from, on top of the Mediterranean, so knowing something about the sea on the Mediterranean would have been helpful. If mytho-history, you can tie the timing of the draining of the earth to the length of time that the Nile would flood Egypt every year, about 6 months. And this is just how long it takes for flooding to come and go. And you could see how that could draw into the story. So it wouldn't be a surprise to see Moses use the same length of time to designate the drainage of the earth. The addition of the wind is a clear reference to the wind that blew back the Red Sea to make dry land for the Hebrews to pass through. Now, hanging on to that wind a moment longer, the word for wind is ruach, and it refers to wind or breath or life or spirit. When finally everything with ruach in it had been destroyed, that is, everything with the breath of life in it had been destroyed, God made a ruach over the earth. God made a breath or life over the earth. And you could tie this as well to Genesis 1:2, when immediately prior to the 7 days of creation, the Spirit of God, the Ruach Elohim, was hovering over the face of the waters. So here's the question. This wind, is this a natural wind over the waters? Or is it in the absence of life on the earth that God filled the air with life? Or is it that this wickedness purged from the with the wickedness purged from the earth, that once again the presence of the Spirit of God was obvious on the waters? I would say that trying to parse these from each other would actually miss the entire point. In every case, the ruach over the waters paints a picture of peace. The earth, purged from violence and wickedness, purged from the torments, was again at rest. The same rest and relief that Noah's father had foretold when he named his son back in chapter 5, verse 29. Now that's it for today. Next we will continue through chapter 8. But before signing off though, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe and click that notification button. I have no idea where it is. You're going to have to find it yourself. If you think this has been good or helpful or cringeworthy, please pass it along to anyone else you think should or should enjoy it. Throw something into the comments. And today I'm interested in knowing how difficult you think it would have been, for Noah to board that ark, knowing that everyone else, cousins, childhood friends, everyone other than his immediate family, were about to be killed. And do you think he was tempted to just join them in death? And that'll do for today. Cheerio.